Hi, I'm State Senator Jamie Eldridge. Welcome to another edition of Half Hour on the Hill, my first 2022 issue, and thank you so much for watching. My guest today is Andrea Becerra, the Sustainability Director for the town of Acton. And Andrea, thank you so much for coming on to Half Hour on the Hill.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And we were talking before, is you just passed your 1-year anniversary working for the town of Acton.
Yeah, that's right. It really has flown by. It's hard to believe that it's been a year.
I was saying that I felt like you've been here for 2 years because you're doing so much great work. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. That's really nice. Yeah, the work never stops. So maybe that's why it feels like it's been less than a year. So just keeping really busy.
Well, I know obviously representing Acton now for 20 years. This is actually my 20th year as a legislator for Acton, as I know how active Acton has been, particularly over the past 10 years on the climate crisis and combating climate change. So I know why you're so busy, because we have so many active residents.
Oh yeah, Acton residents keep me very busy. Well, as you know, there's the Climate Emergency Declaration, and that really led to the creation of the Sustainability Office. So the Climate Emergency Declaration was passed in the 2020 town meeting.
Right.
And it received near unanimous approval. And it basically calls for net zero by 2030. The town commits the town to net zero by 2030. And it is incumbent on state and federal support as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I will certainly do everything I can to provide that state support. And that actually, that goal is ahead. It's more advanced than the state goal of net zero by 2040. So I commend Acton for doing that. So.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it's definitely ahead of the state goal, and it's ahead of the goal for many communities actually. So Acton is definitely a pilot case in that sense, and I think it'll be a learning experience for both Acton and surrounding communities that are watching closely as we try to meet our target for net zero.
And my understanding is that Acton's not just a model for the state, but it's actually sort of competing or on par with cities in other states. You know, in I think Ann Arbor and I think maybe New York City. I think.
Yes, Ithaca and
Ithaca,
yes. New York has a net zero by 2030 target, and they just actually committed to electrify all their buildings by 2030. And then Ann Arbor, Michigan also has a net zero by 2030 goal. And we're actually working very closely with cities across the United States that have these ambitious targets. And we're forming a coalition. And we're really just learning from each other, seeing what ideas we can exchange, and also see what sort of federal support we can get.
Excellent, excellent. And is there a name for that coalition yet, or?
So there is, but it's not. Hasn't been officially launched, so I feel like I can't give it away yet. But stay tuned.
Okay. Yeah, we don't want to do breaking news on ActonTV. So.
Yes, no, not yet.
But that's great. That's great. And if I may ask, I mean, how is it so advanced? How is the plan so advanced, perhaps compared to other communities, in your view?
The Climate Action Plan?
Yes.
So we're still in the process of finalizing the Climate Action Plan, but the final Climate Action Plan will be very advanced in the sense that it will map out what net zero by 2030 actually means and what it's going to cost. So our Climate Action Plan blueprint has a list of over 50 strategies in our buildings, energy, transportation, strategies around natural resources. And our second phase of our Climate Action Plan, and we just hired a consultant to work with us and do that analytical assessment of all those strategies and identify the top 15. And they're going to do a cost-benefit analysis and map out, you know, what is it going to cost to reach net zero by 2030. And they're not just going to be looking at like the financial cost, but they're going to be looking at health cost, the cost of carbon. So it's going to be a pretty comprehensive look at the strategies we currently have. And that will be published in May. And we're going to have an event in June to celebrate.
Excellent.
And actually, we are going to have our first workshop as part of this second phase on March 2nd, on Wednesday at 12 p.m.
And what will happen at that meeting or gathering? Yeah,
so everyone will get a chance to meet Eastern Research Group, which is the consultants we're working with on this phase 2, and they're called ERG. So ERG will run through the methodology that they're going to be using and proposing for narrowing down these strategies, and we'll be seeking community input on the methodology and keeping people informed of the process. So I mean, that has been really a pillar of the Climate Action Plan is seeking public input. So in the Climate Action Plan blueprint, we had over 11 workshops, including one with the Acton Boxborough Regional School District students called Resource Force.
Okay.
And so they led their own workshop at the schools and basically led their own Climate Action Plan process, and that helped inform our Climate Action Plan blueprint. But that's just an example of the community input that we really solicited.
Sure.
And so this second phase will also be keeping people updated and getting feedback throughout the process.
That is fantastic, and I'm glad you mentioned the schools because I was very supportive of Acton using its Green Communities Act money, I think at least a decade ago, to hire Kate Crosby to be the sort of energy efficiency manager that she is in the Acton Boxborough schools. And I just remember her showing me within the first year of her in that position, she saved, you know, far more money than her salary in the school district. So.
Oh yeah. I have the stat somewhere because I share it with folks who are interested in learning more about how much savings these positions can create. But unfortunately, I don't want to throw in a number and be wrong, but it's a lot of money that she saved for the schools. And actually, the town of Acton, including the schools, because we work together on green communities, we reduced our energy consumption by over 30% in the last 10 years.
That's incredible.
Or a little bit over 10 years since we've been a green community.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so that's a big reduction, and so we're hoping to continue, of course, that trend.
Yeah. And so how was that, if you can talk about that, how was that reduced by 30%? What actions were taken?
Yeah, so we received over $1 million in Green Communities funding in the last 10 years. So we've been applying for funding every year. And with that funding, we've done all sorts of energy efficiency upgrades and improvements. So everything from insulating to weather stripping, to changing light bulbs to be more efficient, and all of that, you know, you do it to all these buildings that are on, you know, a lot of the time, especially like buildings like the public safety facility that are on 24/7, buildings in the school that have, you know, so many classrooms. You really see those energy savings add up. So over the 10 years of doing a lot of this work, those energy savings have accumulated quite a bit.
Okay.
And to toot our own horn, we did receive a Leading by Example award.
Yes, I saw that. Yep.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it definitely is the award recognizes over a decade of work that the town has done, and but it's a really great recognition of the hard work that has been done by both the town and the schools as well. Absolutely.
And part of that work, because, you know, there's the retrofitting and upgrading older or existing buildings, but then there's the vision for, you know, new buildings and new structures, and you've got the twin elementary school in West Acton and the North Acton fire station. And if you could talk about that and how those are made, I believe, net zero, almost net zero energy.
Yes. So they're both going to be heated and cooled with ground source heat pumps, and they both have solar, so they're fully electric, and of course the buildings were built incredibly tight.
Sure, yeah.
So when you're starting from the ground up, it's very easy to make sure that, you know, the building, you know, no air is escaping or coming into the building. And that ensures that you're using the least amount of energy possible. So you're very energy efficient, but then when you're using energy, it's going to be electric energy. And in the town in particular, most of our buildings are on Acton Power Choice Green. So that includes the North Acton Fire Station. So
Sure.
the electricity powering that building will be 100% renewable, in addition to the solar, of course, that will also help offset the energy use.
That's excellent.
Yeah, it's a fully green building.
That's excellent. And I think that's one of the points that I've been making at the state level, and really has been led by Senator Mike Barrett, the Senate Chair of the Telecommunication, Utility, and Energy Committee, is if we electrify the grid, you know, and therefore everything is powered by electricity, then it's about, you know, state, federal government, obviously other stakeholders, making sure that the sources of power are 100% clean. You know, no more coal, no more gas, and just renewable sources. So that's the vision, and that's, to get there, we need to electrify the grid in our buildings and our homes.
Yes, definitely. And that's definitely a priority in the Climate Action Plan blueprint, is what we call triple electrification. So electrifying our buildings, ensuring that they're as insulated as possible, and then having solar as well. And you can add that fourth electrification by installing an EV charger as well. But the other thing, speaking of electrification, is the Electrification Roadmap. So the town and the Acton-Boxborough Regional School District receive funding from the state to do an assessment of the electrification needs of our top energy consuming buildings. So in the town, we're looking at the public safety facility, we're looking at town hall, and we're looking at the memorial library as well.
Okay, okay, so those are the largest users of energy.
Yes, yes, and we're hoping that this roadmap serves not only to identify exactly the steps that we need to take to electrify these buildings, as well as the costs associated with those upgrades, but also serves as an example for other communities as well.
And are you seeing other communities reaching out to you to get guidance? Is that happening more and more?
Regarding the electrification roadmap, not yet.
Okay.
But we expect that once it's published and out there and we're promoting it, or at least explaining what it's all about once it's been finalized, I suspect we'll get a lot of outreach. But we do get a lot of outreach in other ways. People want to learn about the Climate Action Plan process, especially if they don't have a sustainability office or someone working on sustainability or dedicated to sustainability in their town. They want to know, what they can do to pursue something like a Climate Action Plan. So I've had a lot of those conversations. That's
great. That's great to hear. And I was curious, and I appreciate work by, I think, the Acton Climate Coalition around the equity issues and making sure people that are less well off, those maybe renting or living in public housing or facing more economic challenges, how do we make sure that those individuals and families are benefiting and participating in this process? Because I will say often the clean energy movement tends to be sort of a middle and upper middle class movement and leaves out working class families.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's one that we address in the Climate Action Plan blueprint throughout. We talk about equitable modifiers, so how to make certain strategies more equitable. So for example, one of the strategies is by 2030, making Acton Power Choice an opt-out program.
Oh, sure, sure.
And so that could have implications for low-income families who suddenly get put into an electric, or their electric bill suddenly goes up. So we are looking at seeing how can we offset the cost for those low-income families. So that's one example. There's tons of other examples as well. Like for example, EVs, making them more accessible. So there's a really great program in Boston. It's called EV Good to Go, and we're going to be exploring, and hopefully we'll be able to launch something similar in Acton, in multifamily housing where folks maybe don't have as much access to transportation or might want to drive an electric vehicle. So EV Good to Go is a car sharing program, and it's tiered by income. So you pay based on your income, and you essentially you rent the vehicle for a set amount of time, and it's available all the time. Sort of like Zipcar.
Sure, yeah, I was thinking about that. Yep.
Yeah, it's very similar to Zipcar, except there's that income piece tiered into that, and it is an electric vehicle. And it's also set at a market rate for folks who just want to have just one car or want to try an electric vehicle for the day. But they've seen really good success in Boston, so we're going to explore something similar in Acton.
Okay, well that is encouraging, and glad that there's a focus on that, yeah. And I think that the Acton Climate Coalition has had events that have specifically focused on renters as well.
Yes,
yeah.
There's the Acton Committee for Housing and Climate.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow.
And so they're dedicated to the intersection of climate issues and housing in particular. And so that's been a really great committee that's been driving a lot of the conversation around some of the particular like barriers for things like getting an energy audit. If you're a renter, it can be a little bit more complicated. So trying to get answers and solutions to these types of questions.
Sure, sure. And I'm glad to hear that, because one of the bills that I have filed this session that we're still trying to pass is the HERO bill, the Housing Environment Revenue Options, which is a deeds excise fee that would raise about $300 million, half for affordable housing and half for climate resiliency, and making the point that those two are deeply connected. You know, multifamily housing has less of a carbon footprint than single-family homes or a subdivision, but also especially a lot of housing, you know, near our oceans or, you know, rivers is really a greater risk of flooding because of the impact of climate change. So how can we make that housing more climate resilient?
Yeah, that's a really great initiative. Resilience is definitely an important part of all of these strategies, right? Thinking about the climate risks in the future. So we'll be looking at that as well as part of our strategy assessment. So thinking about, you know, what are the co-benefits of some of these strategies, and how can we, the co-benefits like clean air, clean water, or resilience, for example.
Sure.
So how can we make our future buildings not just more green, but also more resilient to future climate impacts?
Absolutely. And I also think especially for affordable housing or public housing is lower electricity bills, lower energy bills is really making that point, is that we're going through a transition now where, you know, some of the green options are more expensive, but the idea is with a full sort of envelope and real planning for development and for building, that actually be lower energy costs for consumers or for families.
Yes, definitely. Insulation, that's why insulation is always one of the first things that people can do. It's free, or sometimes it's free. Right now, Mass Save is offering 100% free insulation for some people. So it's really worth it to ask. You call Mass Save, and you'll get a free energy audit. That piece is free, that first part. And then you'll get a list of all the energy upgrades that you can make to your home. Some are heavily subsidized and some are free. And so it's always worth it to just make that phone call, because that first part is always going to be free.
Sure.
And that's, you know, that it's free because us ratepayers always pay an amount in our utility bills towards this program. So take advantage of it, or that's what I say to folks, is take advantage of that program.
Absolutely.
Especially now that there are new incentives.
Sure, sure. And I would just say your position must be very challenging, because of course to get all these things accomplished, you're having to, or perhaps other folks, interacting with all these different town departments, right, to sort of put out this plan?
Yes, cross-departmental collaboration is key. I mean, we wouldn't be able to do it without collaborating with other departments. So for the Climate Action Plan Blueprint, we did have, I did interview a lot of staff. We interviewed a lot of staff. And then we also had a meeting with the departments where the strategies might overlap with some of the work in other departments. And in general, there's just overlap in every sense, to be honest. There's a lot of overlap with planning, with our government affairs team that manages the Crosstown Connect and some of our transportation. There's an overlap with Public Works. That's the great thing about sustainability, is that it really does cross all the different departments, and I think it makes it fun and exciting.
Absolutely.
So collaboration is a really important part of that.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. And I am curious, so you just passed your 1-year anniversary. If you could talk, and I should have asked this earlier, but what is some of your background around environment or climate work? What did you do before you came to the town of Acton?
Yeah, so it feels like I've only been in Acton. But before this, I worked for the Natural Resources Defense Council. So I worked for them for over 5 years. And I worked mostly in Latin America.
Okay.
So I worked from the DC office representing Latin America issues. I'm originally from Chile. I was born in Chile.
Okay.
My mom's from Massachusetts. My dad's Chilean. And so I have Latin American roots. So that was one of the reasons why I was focusing on Latin America.
Sure.
Also, the stars aligned and the job opening appeared. And
yeah, it sounds like an amazing job.
yeah. So I feel like I'm digressing. But before that, I worked for a public relations firm that did PR for nonprofits.
Okay.
And then I did some more environmental work before then, in right after undergrad.
Okay.
I got to work in the Yucatan Peninsula,
okay.
in Merida, and I worked a lot with farmers. So that was really interesting. I think that was my first real introduction to environmental issues, because they were facing a ton of drought issues and issues with their crops. So very different from what we're seeing in Acton, but still really important context, and sort of gives context to the reasons why we're doing what we're doing.
Sure.
Why we're doing the climate action work that we're doing.
Sure. And the work for the NRDC, I mean, what are some of the impacts that are already happening in Latin America with glaciers or snow or flooding or?
Yeah, so a lot of the work was focused mostly in Chile.
Okay.
I mean, we did a lot of work in Mexico as well, which also has a ton of issues with drought. And so Chile and Mexico are the top two most most at risk when it comes to drought in the Americas, so North America, South America, and Central America. So glacier melt is a really major issue in Chile, because
very mountainous.
Yeah, and because it doesn't rain much. So Chile, or at least in the central and upper region of Chile, the southern region, it rains a ton. But the central region is where most of the population is, and glacial melt is something that the population depends on for water when there is no rain. And so about 40% of the city's glacial region is expected to disappear by 2040. So that's a big reserve that's starting to melt away. So it's a pretty big problem in Santiago, which is the major city in Latin America, and actually where most of the population lives. It's very concentrated in the city.
And not to go back too far to your work there, but are Latin American countries in general taking stronger action to combat climate change? Is that increasing, or
stronger action than the U.S.?
Yeah, sure.
That's hard to say. Yeah, I wouldn't say that they're necessarily taking stronger action.
Okay.
I guess it depends in what area. I mean, Chile was doing a lot when it comes to electrifying. They were already starting to electrify their buses in the city, and there's a ton being done on electric vehicle transportation as well.
Okay.
But yeah, it's hard to say like who's doing more. There's always like they have ambitious targets, but I'd say that everyone's doing their best.
And we're at a point where the United States is back to trying to do its part to combat climate change. It's still a little uncertain, and that's where the leadership of a state like Massachusetts and obviously communities like Acton are so critical to show that there is a path and there is this sort of bold action that can be taken.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm really glad I'm working at this level because this is a really exciting level. I mean, this is where a lot of the work gets done, is at the local level. And you see it here, like the momentum is really building, and you really see the tangible actions that local governments can take. And so I mentioned this in a few presentations. You know, when the U.S. Stepped out of the Climate Action Accord, or the Paris Accord, which was a global agreement to reach net zero by 2050, global goal. When the U.S. stepped out, like over 100 million people, stepped up in terms of local government, the equivalent of over 100 million people stepped up to declare that they were still in. So that's a lot of people, and it really showed the power and importance that local government plays in addressing climate change.
Absolutely, and I remember Massachusetts, so we passed a resolution committing ourselves to that, and I know a lot of cities and towns did as well.
Yes, it was called We Are Still In, and so there's a sprinkling, and there's a map that shows all the local communities and states that we're still in, and it's a very colorful map. Yeah,
that's fantastic, and you know, I think what I always try to emphasize, and especially for me as an elected official, is that it's really about, to make these things happen, to make sure that the work you're doing continues. It's about political will. It's making sure that the residents are advocating for this, and you know, the Acton Climate Coalition, Green Acton. I was glad to hear about this Acton Housing and Climate Committee, which I wasn't familiar with, but that political will is so important to, you know, creating the position that you're in, and obviously further supporting your work. So, I know you can't comment as much about the political will, but I just wanted to emphasize that. But I just want to thank you as an Acton resident, as someone that's very active in climate and environmental issues. Andrea, thank you so much for your amazing work in Acton, your vision, and your partnership. And thank you for coming on to Half Hour on the Hill.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I can't believe half an hour passed by.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So yes, so thanks so much for those that checked into the 2022 issue of Half Hour on the Hill with Andrea Becerra, the Sustainability Director for Town of Acton. And please stay tuned for future shows. Thanks.